Well, I do worry about him taking desperate steps. And this is why I think there is a reasonable chance that he will go back to a massive bombing campaign. And that will be a massive bombing campaign. We will end up destroying a huge amount of infrastructure in Iran and killing many people. And this is what happens when countries become desperate. But my point to you is that it won't work. With regard to a meltdown, I think that may be overstating it. That may happen, but I think it's, again, I hate to keep going back to the Vietnam analogy, but I watched what happened to President Johnson. I was young at the time, and but nevertheless remember very well, when we entered the war full bore in March of 1965, and then what happened to President Johnson over the next, let's say, 3 years. By March 1968, it was all over for him. He said he was not going to run for another term. He was a defeated man. The war had worn him down. You could see it in his face. You could hear it in his voice. It was a devastating personal defeat for him, as well as a defeat for the country. And one can imagine a similar situation with regard to President Trump. He's not going to win this war. It's turned out to be the kind of war that he promised us he would never enter into. And of course, when he entered the war, he didn't think this was going to happen. And by the way, this is one of the big differences between Vietnam and this war. In the Vietnam War, Johnson understood full well that he was in effect entering a war where we had no formula for winning that war. He thought it was essential that we enter the war anyway and try and figure out how we could win it as we moved along. But he was very pessimistic from the get-go. This is different. Trump was optimistic. This one is like the Iraq War in 2003. You remember that, where the Bush administration was wildly optimistic about how the invasion of Iraq was going to turn out. And then, of course, President Bush landed on the aircraft carrier and declared that the mission had been accomplished. Of course, it all went to hell in a handbasket shortly after that. But in the case of Iraq, 2003, just like the case here in Iran on February 28th, we thought we were going to win a quick and decisive victory and live happily ever after. Very different than the Vietnam War. Johnson and his advisors did not have any illusions, but it, in this case, didn't work out very well. And the question is, what does Trump do now? And as you and I have said on a number of occasions in the show, he has no good option.
Well, at least in Iraq, the United States did, win in terms of winning the war, but it couldn't consolidate that victory. That is, the insurgency came, and it could be defined for a short period of time in Bush's defense. But with Iran, there was never a victory at all, though, which makes it very difficult or different. But there seems, I guess, the new branding now of the wars, it gives me a reason to be pessimistic. That is, that the wars are going to be escalated. For example, if you look in the European media now, they have reversed back to that Ukraine has turned the tide. Ukraine is winning again. This is the propaganda is dialed up to 100 again. So now suddenly, victory is we're gonna defeat the Russians again. They're going back to all of this nonsense. And on the US side, I thought it was a very interesting rebranding. That is, you see more and more references to, the Iran war is essentially over. Which, the war which the United States started it with a surprise attack. This is over, but now there's a new conflict, which is that Iran is blocking the Strait of Hormuz, and America has to liberate this international waterway. Now, I'm not sure if this is again, to resell the war as, this time we didn't attack, we're going to open it or, liberate it, or if this is just to sell it to Congress that this is a completely different war than the previous. I'm not sure. How are you seeing this? Because there's so much focus on the information war, the war of narratives these days, that but it's how the actors are seeking to shape the narrative. It is a good indication of where they're going to go with this, though.
Yeah, just to start with Ukraine, there's no question that if you look at the narrative in the West at this point in time, it's that the Ukrainians are winning. They've turned the tide. The Russians are on their back feet and so forth and so on. The great danger there, Glenn, is that gives the Europeans and the Ukrainians an incentive to increase the attacks on the Russian homeland. The argument that people are making is that we finally have the Russians on the run, that these attacks are devastatingly effective, and let's just, ramp up the number and quality of the attacks, and we'll do even better on the battlefield. If you believe that rhetoric, as we discussed before, you're asking for really big trouble. To go to the case of Iran, I think there is some rebranding. I don't think it matters very much. The question is, what is the United States going to do to defeat Iran and to get our way? Is it going to involve opening the straits? I don't think anybody really believes that we can do that and achieve victory. I think that's why they're talking about the bombing campaign. It really seems to me that you're now at a point with regard to the Iran conflict or the Iran war where you have two choices. Maybe you have three choices. One is to continue the status quo. Two is to accept defeat, cut a deal. And number three is to restart the bombing campaign. Those are the options. But I don't think there's much serious talk about taking the strait. And if they even took the strait, that wouldn't be the end of it, because the Iranians have all sorts of counters that they can turn to. So I think, we are where we are with the Iran war.
Just my last question, is there any other card the U.S. can play here? I mean, do you see any regional actors, Kurds, Azerbaijanis, anyone they could use, Pakistan, anyone who can essentially take the role of the Ukrainians of the Middle East, someone they can, or the Europeans for that sake, someone they can outsource the war to. It's just hard to see. I don't see anyone with the capabilities that is same as in Europe. I think Ukraine was kind of the last chance to defeat the Russians, but there's no other large proxy army you can build in that part of the world.
No, if the United States and Israel together could not defeat Iran, who else could? It looks like the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, are spoiling for a fight with Iran. And in fact, it appears that the UAE participated with the United States and Israel during the 40-day bombing campaign. But the UAE by itself is no match for Iran. And in fact, if the UAE were to get into a fight with Iran, I think the Iranians would destroy the UAE as a country. They go after the desalination plants. They go after their energy infrastructure. It would be a total disaster for the UAE. In fact, I don't understand why the UAE is not trying to work out some sort of modus vivendi with the Iranians. But of course, they're not. But they're not in a position to take on the Iranians. No, this is, I think, very simple. If we can't do it militarily, we meaning the United States can't do it militarily with the Israelis, that means it can't be done. And we've failed. And therefore, we have to cut a deal. And that deal is going to reflect the fact that we lost and Iran won. And that is, at this point in time, unacceptable to the United States. And as you can imagine, Glenn, that is categorically unacceptable to the Israelis, because the Israelis view Iran as an existential threat, rightly or wrongly. And so if Trump were to be inclined to cut a deal that reflected the fact that we lost, the Israelis and their supporters in the United States would fight that mightily. And that, of course, makes you wonder, where is this train headed, right? Maybe what I'm saying here is that even if Trump is inclined to cut a deal, the pressure on him not to cut that deal from Israel and its supporters in the United States, who are enormously influential, could prevent him from sitting down with the Iranians. And then you say to yourself, where does this all lead?
Well, the media suggests we could be only a day or so away from returning to war with Iran, and I'm hearing that the Russians gonna unveil some new weapons in Ukraine. So it looks like it's gonna be a very troubling week ahead. So let's check back again later. Do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
No, I agree with you. I think we could title this talk "Up the Escalation Ladder." Just very depressing to think where we are. And it's also very depressing to think that two individuals like us who have spent a lot of time thinking about these issues really can't come up with stories to tell about either one of these two conflicts that have even a quasi-happy ending. It's just very depressing.
I keep wondering if feels like there's a wider problem we have now across the West. That is the inability to objectively look at a situation. For years, at least between 2015 and 2022, I was always warning that we should do everything we can to implement the Minsk agreement. With we should be happy we have this. This can prevent a major war. If we ignore this, we're going to invite a major war. And it was impossible to even have that discussion. Every time I tried to make this point, the argument more or less was, well, that's pro-Russian. If you're pro-Western or pro-Ukrainian, then you won't implement this because this would be a capitulation. So everything's dumbed down to pro this or pro that, and no one ever explained how they imagine this playing out. If you ignore this peace deal, you build up the Ukrainian army to the point where the Russians sees, okay, now we can't accept this existential threat. I mean, even now, we will know what has happened by ignoring this peace, by escalating at every turn. This was not good for Ukraine. It's being destroyed. This is not good for the West. We're being weakened, being fragmented. No one can explain a convincing story how this was going to play out. And even after it all becomes a mess, they use it as an evidence for, well, look, we always told you that Russia was bad, but there's no serious discussion. And it's just, if you have to be pro this, and if you are, then you have to repeat these slogans. If you contest it, well, then you're with the enemy, essentially. I miss common sense. I miss actual discussions and debate. We definitely don't have it in this country, and it's a big problem across Europe. So anyways, yep.
Hard to disagree with you. Just one final point, Glenn, just going back to Vietnam. One thing I learned in those days, and it's been proven true over time, is that it's very easy for the United States to get involved in wars, but it's very difficult to get out. You get into these conflicts thinking you're going to win a quick and decisive victory, or you pursue a policy that looks like there's going to be big trouble ahead, but you say to yourself, I can deal with it. I can fix the problem as I move forward. But that is invariably not the case. You rarely win quick and decisive victories when you go to war. Sometimes you do, but and when the United States picks a fight with a country like Iran, I say to myself when it starts that this one is going to be very difficult to get out of. Same thing is true when we invade Iran. I mean, when we invade Afghanistan and when we invade Iraq. I mean, we go into Iraq in 2003. We finally get out in 2011. Then we have to go back in 2014. And we still have troops on the ground in Iraq. We're still interfering in the politics of Iraq. It's really quite amazing. It took us 20 years to get out of Afghanistan. And the Vietnam War was another disaster. But anyway, getting into these conflicts is much easier than getting out of them. That's one lesson I learned a long time ago, and I think these conflicts prove that to be true.